Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory, and today I'll be flying solo while my co-host Ken takes a well-earned break. We know that human connection is a key factor in achieving positive therapy outcomes, and with that in mind, I'm thrilled to welcome back a familiar voice, one of our frequent flyers on the podcast, Meg Moss, Head of Policy at the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Today we'll be discussing how NHS policy design could support a wider range of therapeutic approaches. So Meg, welcome back.
Hello Rory, thank you. Yes, lovely to be back again.
Yes, as I say, a frequent flyer. And today's discussion I think it's a really important one about how we evidence good outcomes in therapy. What is the secret formula for showing positive outcomes in therapy? And there's a bit of a collision between ways of collating data, and I'm thinking regarding maybe how the NHS collect data and the wide array of research that actually shows what makes therapy work. I wonder what conclusions you're coming to, Meg, on that.
Yeah, so you and I and kind of anyone in practice know that human connection is vital for effective therapy. And common factors research, which I know you know an awful lot about, shows that the most significant predictor of therapeutic success isn't necessarily the specific intervention used, but the quality of the relationship between therapist and the client. So that alliance, so how safe, how understood, and how engaged the client feels, that plays a key role in whether therapy leads to meaningful change. So, but when we're looking at, so for example, NHS talking therapies and perhaps other therapy services, we see systems that prioritise interventions with randomised controlled trial RCT data rather than focusing on that relational depth. So the emphasis is more like structured and manualised approaches, things like CBT, which is easier to measure in trials, but they don't necessarily reflect the full range of what makes therapy work. Those trials don't, and the provision of that therapy doesn't always reflect that either. So other parts of the UK, so like Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, they don't require RCT, randomised controlled trial data for their NHS services, which allows them to kind of deliver broader and more relationally driven support. So I suppose, like, why aren't services designed around that? And so you've got common factors research, which I'm sure you could probably talk to probably better than I can.
So I think what you're really referring to is qualitative and quantitative research. And RCT data sounds more like quantitative research, figures, numbers, statistics, whereas other research is qualitative. Now, the thing, anybody who's done any research, and I'm sure there's lots of people listening here, will know that quantitative research is probably the easiest to gather. It's the simplest to gather because you can send out a form, how is our service between 1 and 5, and people click on, and most people click anything in my experience. I know when I get anything where I have to do anything, to shut the flipping app down, I just click any old thing. And we know that it's not really a good overall measure of data. It's a way of collecting it. And interestingly enough, most psychotherapeutic services or organisations go on qualitative data, and that is case studies, interviews with client outcomes. And also, there's a whole big piece of research. It was done, well, I mean, it's been going on for years, but there's something called Lambert's pie. And Lambert was a researcher who made a kind of pie chart of what worked in therapy. And if my memory serves me correctly, what they came up with was that the relationship was a big factor, client motivation was another factor, and surprisingly enough, and disappointingly for some people, the modality of therapy was around 15% of that pie. The two other sides, there's a placebo effect as well. And I think what we were talking about is, in the NHS, one size fits all, and not having a kind of wide array of therapy that may be of service to clients. Driving this data to say, well, look, this works, so we're going to stick with what we know, as opposed to looking a little bit wider, maybe, to research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what they need to start doing, isn't it? So there is a lot of really good research at the moment coming out of University of Roehampton, which is Mick Cooper and lots and lots of other kind of researchers there, and they are obviously trying to tackle this issue that we're currently seeing. But yeah, we need the commissioners and people who are writing these guidelines and commissioning these services to be able to look at data from a range of different approaches and have a fuller picture of actually what is happening and what is out there.
Yeah.
We're just looking at it upside down at the moment, where we're prioritising things based on modality rather than understanding actually what makes it effective in the first place. Because we're working at, I think there's like 50% efficacy rates in the NHS at the moment, which could hypothetically be improved drastically if you could adapt that model, as in the model where you are assigned a therapist and a type of therapy. If you could adapt that model and make it more about giving people the choice of the therapy that they have and the therapist that they speak to, how would that impact on efficacy rates?
Yeah.
And so the hypothesis is that it would have a positive impact. That's actually something that I'm looking at pursuing further this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for a long time, I know the NHS has made a lot of movement, certainly in my time in this kind of profession. But there's still that tendency for CBT to dominate, cognitive behavioural therapy to dominate. And, we both know, Meg, that for some client presentations, CBT just isn't useful. Trauma, attachment, working with, coming to terms with maybe divergent conditions. It's not it's sometimes counterintuitive. It has the opposite effect. And it would be nice if we had a more pluralistic offering within our NHS. I guess drawing on the thousands of highly trained therapists that's already trained up. We've got, I don't want to use the term army, but we have an army of very highly trained therapists. I meet them on a daily basis in my day-to-day work, who could be seconded into the NHS to provide this service, this relational service, if the mental health services altered their policies. And I think this is about policy-driven thinking, isn't it?
It is. The whole kind of structure of like NHS mental health services kind of works against the things that make therapy effective. And it is, yeah, like you say, very policy driven things that could change. So, for example, clients, patients in NHS speak are matched with whichever practitioner has availability rather than someone they can connect with. Sessions are time limited, which means the relationship barely has time to kind of develop before it's over. Practitioners are, they focus on delivering interventions in a rigid way rather than adopting, like you say, a pluralistic approach to meet the needs of the person that's in their therapy room. And then the other side of that kind of policy level thing is the emphasis on recovery rate. So people are assessed on symptom reduction rather than their overall well-being or their therapeutic engagement, which means that people are dropping out of services because the process doesn't feel meaningful to them, but they don't necessarily have other options for support. And how is then that being captured as well? Are they dropping out because they haven't found the process meaningful? We're not capturing that data at the moment. This is a whole big grey area of that data that no one's really looking at. It's like, well, why aren't you here anymore? And obviously, when people stop engaging, they're not going to want to fill in your survey to say why they're not here. But in all likelihood, a chunk of them will be like, well, this isn't working for me. I can't be bothered. So for me, it's like, how could we shape those policies, that service design around human connection, and what would the impact be if we kind of built a system that had a stronger focus on relationships, that was allowed for more flexibility in approach and more room for the therapist to work relationally rather than in a very specific modality locked way. I don't know what that would look like, but that is what I would kind of, one, would love to see, and two, think would be really the only way of running a really effective service that works for those that need it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what struck me when you were talking was that, the counselling offering of the NHS is part of a wider offering of all sorts of treatments, and it falls broadly under the umbrella of the medical model. And medical models tend to go for quantitative research. If anybody takes tablets or any form of engagement with the medical profession, usually it's a quantitative piece of research. I'm taking some tablets for a chest infection, and I've been told that I have to fill a form in by the end of today on the phone, and I guarantee you that it'll be 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, and there'll be very little space for me to actually speak about my experience. It will be very, very quantitative, and then they'll look at the graphs and they'll say, well, this works very well. But therapy doesn't really work like that. And the thing is, the frustrating thing for me is that the research shows that. And, anybody who's been any kind of therapist for any time will know that if you have extended sessions, you may not get to what's really going on for the client until session 5. They may present with one thing, and then when you get to session 5, actually, you uncover, or between you uncover what's really going on. And the danger with short encounters with very narrow focus is that you work on what's being presented, and that's not actually what the issue is. And then someone goes away and they're still struggling.
Yeah, that is a huge one of the huge pitfalls of these kind of limited time sessions. I'm not saying that there there isn't room for really solution-focused kind of brief intervention. But some people will want that, and some people will feel so much better with like just going in and having a plan. But that's not for everybody, and I think this is the point. It's like there needs to be more diversity in approach, because every single human being is different, and we know that in like you talking about medication, right? We know that not everyone's going to react the same to different medications. You can have 8, 9, 10, whatever different types of medication to solve one problem, because people react differently to it. And so you try one and that doesn't work. Okay, you try another. But we don't have that. We don't have that in the mental health services at the moment. How do we build that in? Because I think that is overlooked. And I really appreciate something you said, you know, NHS talking therapies, we didn't have anything like this before. This is, I know it's been going for a while, but in terms of the NHS, it's actually relatively new department, and it's still going through its learning and growing and changing, and that's absolutely fine. You know, this is kind of what I'm here for. This is my job, is to talk about this stuff and make suggestions and see how I can influence it. You know, specifically to represent counselling and psychotherapy, but you know, as a human being, I just want this service to be better, and how can I do that?
Yeah. I hear that kind of passion, and to some extent a little bit of frustration. And I also think we have to think about the therapists who deliver this therapy. I've got a couple of friends who remain anonymous who are really struggling delivering this very narrow form of therapy, 6 sessions. And privately they're telling me that they're having to sometimes help the client work out the outcomes on the forms they have to fill in, right, because the client's unsure of what's changed. And I think that's the difficulty, and it burns people out. You know, I think people forget that the practitioner isn't someone, you know, delivering medication or I don't know, operating or having an X-ray machine. It's someone who's trying to connect at a human level with someone that can be hampered by the actual mechanism of delivery of therapy. And I'm sure there are lots of other medical professionals who burn out and struggle in different medical disciplines. But if we look specifically at counselling psychotherapy, you know, I wonder if a wider offering would be useful. And I think one of the things we talked about sort of in a little bit of a prelude to recording this was moving towards more relationally focused service design. You know, it sort of lives in the design of the service, doesn't it?
It does. So I think, when you would redesign that, you'd need to think about 3 things, I think. So a stronger focus on the therapeutic relationship would be the kind of priority. So making sure that you prioritize the quality of the connection between the therapist and the patient/client, rather than just the intervention. I think expanding, so this is me very much with my NCPS hat on, expanding the role of the accredited registers. So you have like 70,000 odd trained practitioners from a variety of different backgrounds on counselling and psychotherapy accredited registers. They are, like you kind of said earlier, you know, they're there to play a bigger role in NHS service provision. They would increase access to a wider variety of practitioners, but also a wider variety of approaches. And because these are accredited registrants, we have this kind of underpinning of patient safety that goes with being on an accredited register. And so this is something that I've been campaigning for quite a while now, which is not necessarily through NHS talking therapies, but more directly providing people with access to the therapist and type of therapy that they want/need, that they would prefer and that they feel drawn to work with. So it's NCPS's Direct Access to Counselling campaign, and counselling, I know how to say that word. I've been at the Society nearly 10 years, Rory, so I should know how to say it now. And yeah, that's about giving GPs more flexibility to refer directly to counsellors and psychotherapists. Yeah. So that's not necessarily NHS talking therapies service design, but I think that's still really important to say here, because actually that would be a really great solution. Anyway, the other thing that I think is just, so focus on the therapeutic relationship, get more counsellors and psychotherapists directly involved, change how we do that, and move towards a model that can be more flexible. So where you can tailor therapy, like you're saying, pluralistic, so you can tailor therapy to each client/patient's needs rather than following a strict protocol, and perhaps even being able to change your therapist at some point if you feel like it's really not working for you. Because that is another thing that we have to be aware of, is that, and acknowledge, is that you may start therapy and go, I can't work with this person for whatever reason, this is not vibing. And to be allowed to change your therapist.
Yes.
I think that should potentially be something that we can support.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, if I think of my journey through the health service with my current chest infection, I was triaged at my doctor's. I saw a nurse prescriber who then prescribed me medication and got it signed off by the doctor. And, it would be great, wouldn't it, if when someone came, maybe to the doctor and said, I'm struggling with this, that they had someone who could triage you in a way where they say, well, maybe we can put you through the NHS services, or alternatively, it sounds like you might want a longer engagement, and they could use people on the accredited registers. And the accredited registers are held by bodies like yourself, NCPS. There's a number of other professional bodies. But you fall under the umbrella of the Professional Standards Association, the PSA, Professional Standards Authority, excuse me. And that is a government body. So there's a quality check there. Anybody on that register has had to go through a process of being a registrant. So you've got a whole group of people who are registered practitioners on the Professional Standards Authority register who potentially could be triaged to. And if the policy and the triage was designed in that way, you could have short-term therapy that may work for some people, or people who come and say, I want to fix this, I'd like this. And then you could say, well, this might be a longer encounter, and build in, as you say, that possibility for, well, I'm actually not really vibing with my therapist, I'd like to move and use another therapist. Because we all know that if you're not trusting and getting on with the person sat in front of you, therapy isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
People will just be sitting there going through the motions. So maybe someone listening to this might like to get in contact with you, Meg, at the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society. We'll put contact details in the show notes. And I'm sure you'd be delighted to work with anybody who could produce maybe better models of care, Meg.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so passionate about this particular subject. And if anyone's interested, I have actually had someone contact me from listening to the podcast before. Chris, if you're listening, again, hello. And we have been working together on something related to this, very exciting. So it does happen, so please get in touch with me. Rory will put my details in, and let's see if we can work together and make some significant change.
Absolutely. And if you want if you want to find where the details are, go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, and look for the special edition located between episodes 328 and 329. You'll find information in the show notes about Human Connection, as well as Meg's contact details. And if anybody knows the current health minister, I think it's Wes Streeting, isn't it? Maybe
I met him.
Yes, well, maybe if you could just send this podcast over to him. I'm sure there must be someone out there who might be connected. Send this podcast and let him have a listen to it, because I think that I think that what you've come up with and what we've talked about today is not only essential, but it's evidence-based, Meg. The evidence is out there, and it's huge. It's been out there for years.
Since the 30s.
Since the 30s.
Yeah.
So, wakey, let's try to get that evidence in front of the people who matter and build a service that supports people, because mental health is by far the biggest challenge we have in our society today. Absolutely the biggest challenge.
And the thing, if we get it right, will have the biggest impact on lots of other areas of our society as well.
Well, on that positive note, Meg Moss from the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Rory.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.